It has been a fair amount of time since FiiO developed a more budget-friendly player, especially something which could compete with the likes of the M0 from Shanling. Initially, the speculation was that FiiO would be releasing a new addition to the BTR line of Bluetooth receivers at their 2019 launch event back in March. But then, at the last minute, during the event, they pulled a quick one on us and revealed that what we thought was the BTR5 was actually this, the M5. A super mini and full-featured standalone portable player. On the front is a 1.54-inch IPS touch display which offers a resolution of 240 by 240 pixels. It's not a particularly crisp display given that it has a pixel density of just 220 pixels per inch, but it also feels adequate for its intended usage and the device's price point. The bottom houses a USB Type-C charging and data port, as well as a single microSD card slot, whereas the top features the power button, volume rocker, and the multifunctional 3.5mm port. This port is of course where you would plug in your headphones, but it can also function as both a line-out and a digital coax connection. There is also a microphone on either side of the volume rocker, which are used when taking calls. Yep, that's right. The M5 even has you covered for making phone calls, and you can also use the device as a voice recorder. Design-wise, the M5 is very similar to the M0 from Shanling, although it's just a tiny bit bigger, and it does lack that volume dial found on the M0. However, I think what FiiO has done here was to see what worked on the M0 and what could be improved. The volume dial on the M0 perhaps kind of looks cool, but it's not the most ergonomic approach, whereas the simpler volume rocker of the M5 works really well regardless of whether you are holding the device in your right or left hand. FiiO has managed to cram even more features into the M5 than what Shanling managed with the M0, and at the end of the day, the M5 has improved almost every aspect of the M0 except for the available power output. The M0 has up to 80 mW available into a 32 ohm load, whereas the M5 has to make do with just 24. This gives it roughly the same power on tap as you'd get with the BTR3 and M3K. To be quite honest though, you're only really likely to run into power issues with more demanding headphones. Other than the available power output though, the M5 is better than the M0 in every way. As far as the software is concerned, let's face it, with such a small display, there's only so much you can really do in terms of finding that perfect balance between how much information is shown, how that information is shown, and then finally keeping the layout intuitive enough to use without encountering any user frustration. Unfortunately, just like the M0, we're still getting a maximum of 4 items shown in the lists, but the text does seem a little bit smaller on the M5, which means that it does display longer character strings. Another feature added to the M5 is a step counter, but it's not always active though, and so you will need to enable it manually. I do just have to say that I'm really impressed by the responsiveness of the display in terms of how quickly and accurately it registers touches. Then there's another software feature which I wanted to highlight simply because it's not something I've seen on any other player, and it's just because of how extremely useful it can be that I need to show you this. If we jump into the settings and then system settings, there's an option called display direction, and what this allows you to do is to adjust the orientation of the display by 90, 180 or 270 degrees. This can be immensely helpful when you connect the M5 up to something like an external DAC device. Sometimes the manner and orientation in which you can stack a source device to a DAC can be influenced by various things like certain hardware control placements, or perhaps even something as simple as the shape of the device or where the digital connection port is located. For a closer look at the UI and various other features, be sure to check out the link in the description for the full written review on the M5. The last thing I thought ought to be mentioned about the design is that FiiO actually included one particular feature in the M5 which you would find on some of the BTR series of devices as well as the Q5S, and that is a little LED indicator which shows you when the device is in Bluetooth pairing mode and which Bluetooth codec is currently being used. And speaking of Bluetooth, this is another area where the M5 is just way ahead of the M0. Shanling designed the M0 to be compatible with a number of Bluetooth audio codecs, but the compatibility is limited to only SBC or LDAC when using the device as a Bluetooth receiver. The M5, on the other hand, can happily receive SBC, AAC, aptX, aptX HD, and LDAC streams. Overall, I think FiiO did a great job with the design of the M5, and I'm really impressed with the features and functionality that has been packed into such a small device. Sound-wise, the M5 is no slouch. Of course, it's not going to replace something like a dedicated external DAC or a player like the M9, let alone the M11, but for what it is, I think it sounds great. There's a certain bit of added warmth over what the M0 has to offer, and so I tend to find the M5 to just sound a bit more natural and engaging. Sitting down for a more critical listening session, what I pick up on is that the M5 can dig into even the deepest of the sub-bass frequencies, and that slightly warmer character is especially great for rock music. Vocals are clear, and the overall instrument separation is really commendable given how small of a device this is. The only thing I could pick up on when I compared the sound of the M5 to that of the new Q5S is that it noticeably lacks some refinement in terms of smoothness and separation. But really, for what it is, for such a tiny and ultra-portable device, the M5 sounds great, and it's not exactly like you would be using something like this to try and extract every last detail out of your music anyways. What I think is really great about a device like the M5 though, is that it gives you the option of taking something this compact pretty much anywhere you need to go, and it'll give you a really good audio experience. And then, when you want to head into audio nirvana, then you can easily hook it up to an external DAC. Now, given the fact that the M5 targets the same price tag as the M0 from Shandling, and just how similar they are in form and function, it makes sense to compare the value of each device relative to the other as well. To some extent, this can seem a little unfair, since the M0 has been out for around a year, if not more already. But since it is still in production, those who are looking to get the M5 might also be looking at the M0 as well. Honestly, the only area in which the M0 has an advantage over the M5 is in terms of the available power, and this will also only be applicable if you try to use more demanding headphones. The M5 has a more ergonomic design, a more intuitive user interface, more digital output options, better compatibility with Bluetooth formats, and it's just an overall more feature-rich device. So, if you're in the market for a new portable player, or if you find yourself just wanting to add a super portable mini player to your collection, then I can highly recommend the M5. That's it for this review on the M5. Thanks so much for watching. If you've liked it, hit that like button, and if you didn't like it, hit that dislike button twice. Please do consider subscribing for more videos in the future. That's all from me for now, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.